What is poppin' YouTube? Back again with my 4 must-draft players in the middle rounds of your fantasy football drafts. Without wasting any time, let's get into it. My first player that we're going to be talking about today is Lamar Jackson. Now, Lamar Jackson, absolutely amazing quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens. It's kind of weird to be talking about Lamar Jackson as a must-draft player in your fantasy football leagues, but for me right now, it's kind of ridiculous. When he has an ADP of around pick 45, we're talking about a guy that's going around QB4, QB6, where Lamar Jackson has proven on a year-to-year basis that he literally has QB1 upside. But when we're talking about redraft fantasy football, we want these Konami code quarterbacks, the guys with elite level rushing upside. And yes, of course, we love some Josh Allen. We love some Patrick Mahomes. We love some Jalen Hurts. But after those 3 guys are off the board, Lamar Jackson is my target, and there's a lot of other quarterbacks that are currently going ahead of Lamar Jackson in fantasy football. If we look back, though, on last season, now this is where a lot of people get a little bit upset with Lamar Jackson. They say Lamar Jackson has let me down the last few years. But if we look, last 3 years, 22.8 fantasy points per game, 21.7 fantasy points per game, and last season, even though he only played 12 games, 20.3 fantasy points per game. Now, what people are going to be saying, well, Caleb, if I'm having to draft him as QB5, QB6, he's literally been finishing a little bit below that, so I'm losing some value. If we look back on when he broke out in 2019, 28.2 fantasy points per game, put him as QB1, was his fantasy football ceiling. So if his ceiling is 28 fantasy points per game, that is league winning upside. And if we're able to get him in those middle rounds where we can kind of address our other positions in rounds 2 and rounds 3, instead of having to take Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen in those rounds, we're able to address a running back. We're able to address, maybe we go heavy wide receiver, and or maybe even too we get a tight end that falls to us. Mark Andrew falls to us in the 3rd, so we're able to get that positional advantage while waiting until rounds 4 or even early round 5 to pick up Lamar Jackson in our fantasy football leagues. That is something that is super exciting to me, and that is why Lamar Jackson is my first must draft player in the middle rounds. My second must draft player in the middle rounds is going to be our boy Kyle Pitts. Now, Kyle Pitts, for a lot of us, we need to be real here. Before we jump into exactly why we like Kyle Pitts, we can look at the metrics. I know a lot of people are off Kyle Pitts. So if you're here, you're going to say, Caleb, oh my goodness, Kyle Pitts, he hasn't proven anything. Everyone in the dynasty landscape is thinking Kyle Pitts is good, but I would much prefer someone that is a little bit more of a surefire option. Because right now, on these underdog drafts, we're talking about Kyle Pitts going after George Kittle, going after Dallas Goedert. And yes, those guys have put up very solid, even George Kittle has put up elite level fantasy football seasons as a tight end. If we actually look at what Kyle Pitts has done in his rookie season, 10.4 fantasy points per game, put him as the tight end 11. Last year dealt with injuries. Last year dealt with terrible quarterback play. With 7.6 fantasy points per game, that is not great. Kyle Pitts is absolutely in elite level company. When we're talking about him as a prospect, if we were going to talk about him as a rookie, we'd be putting him in the same conversation based on wide receiver stats as some of these elite level young wide receivers. And so I understand the metrics didn't look good. I understand the fantasy football performance didn't look good, but as we know, tight end sometimes takes a little bit longer to develop. So I'm excited to see Desmond Ridder with Kyle Pitts in this Atlanta Falcons offense. And I am very much so fine taking a shot on tight end in round 5, round 6 with Kyle Pitts with the elite level upside. Because when we're talking about guys behind him, we're talking about guys like Pat Freiermuth, Dalton Kincaid, guys ahead of him. You got Dallas Goedert, George Kittle, where I think Kyle Pitts honestly could get into that top 4 tight end discussion when we're talking about TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce. That's the type of company that I think Kyle Pitts could ascend himself into, and you're able to get a pretty good value with him. Now, we've been burned twice, so if we get burned again, we're going to feel a little bit bad about this, but I'm super excited. I'm on the Kyle Pitts train. He's my second must draft player in the middle rounds. My third must draft player in the middle rounds is James Cook. Now, a lot of people are feeling so-so about James Cook, mainly because James Cook did not get a ton of the touchdown upside last season, and based on that, a lot of people are assuming, oh my gosh, Josh Allen's going to be getting all the touchdown work. James Cook, yes, maybe he gets a little bit more work this season, but they brought in Damian Harris. Why are you so excited about James Cook? I mean, all the reports are pointing to the fact that he is going to be getting a lot more of the touches than we're currently projecting in that Buffalo Bills offense. But even if we scroll down to his productivity, I mean, you're really starting to look at a guy where he was RB17 on a fantasy points per game opportunity, which is really great. If we look at his breakaway run rate, this is what makes me excited. 12.1% breakaway run rate, put him as the RB1 last season. Yards per touch 2, RB3 was 6.3 yards per touch, and then RB number 2, 5.3 true yards per carry. Those are great stats to kind of project that if James Cook was to get majority of the touches for the Buffalo Bills, this would be something of great value. And considering where he's going in your underdog drafts, there's not a lot of running backs that have the same type of upside and potential that James Cook has. Now, James Cook has risen in the recent weeks. He's definitely risen up the draft boards, but I am super excited about James Cook being my third must-draft player in the middle rounds. And rounding out my fourth and final player that is a must-draft in our fantasy football drafts in the middle rounds is going to be Quentin Johnston. And we've seen, if you've been on Twitter at all, you've seen the hype. You've seen Quentin Johnston absolutely bodying the cornerbacks for the Chargers. And a lot of people are getting excited. A lot of people are like, oh my goodness, like, put this athletic first-round wide receiver with Justin Herbert, and good things are going to happen. Now, what are some of the concerns that Quentin Johnston had coming out of college? One was that he was a body catcher. Two was that he played in the TCU offense where he wasn't necessarily going up against the best cornerback competition. But if we look at what he did in Michigan, absolutely balled. And if we look at his workout metrics, of course, 4.57 40-yard dash, only 6'3", 208. A lot of people were expecting him to be 6'4", be a little bit bigger. But for me, when we look at what is happening, we saw solid fantasy football production from Josh Palmer last season. They put out a tweet today saying that Josh Palmer is still currently the wide receiver 3 in the Chargers offense. But Quentin Johnston is going to overtake him, whether it's by week 1, week 2, week 3. And that's what's exciting to me, because based on previous years, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, while both are great wide receiver options, they both don't end up playing a full season each and every season because they're just getting older. Both those guys. Keenan Allen is 31. You have Mike Williams that's going to be turning 30 years old. And so with these aging wide receivers, having a guy like Quentin Johnston who can come in, not only learn under them, but produce at an elite level fantasy option makes me excited, because if we look at past years, it is not crazy for these rookie wide receivers to come in and put up elite level fantasy production. So that's why I'm really excited for JSN. I'm really excited for Jordan Addison, but I'm especially excited for Quentin Johnston when he's paired with a quarterback like Justin Herbert. I think we're going to be flat out amazed at the value that you're getting with Quentin Johnston. Right now, in your sleeper and underdog leagues, you can get Quentin Johnston around the 7th round. So we're talking about Quentin Johnston as your wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, depending on your build. And that, if you have that type of production in your flex, on your bench, that if he were to emerge as an absolute league winner, you're absolutely going to love getting him in the middle round. So I think it's a perfect value. You're not having to take him too high. You're not having to destroy the rest of your team build. He fits in perfectly with that. And so that is exactly why I'm liking Quentin Johnston as a middle round target in my fantasy football league. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if this is your first time on the channel. Appreciate you guys for all tuning in here today. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.